So I want to welcome everyone to our program today. This is the first of our 2023 Icebreaker series, and we're really excited about this year and this today's speaker. So I'd like to introduce Allison Madison. She is with the Wisconsin Saltwater Sustainability and Development. She's their coordinator. And she has a lot of experience in dealing with this topic, and also, checked in to make sure she had some Michigan relevant data. We're excited about the number of people we had registered today. Just so you know, the tip of the Mitt Watershed Council, we are focused. Our major priority is water quality and all things water quality for Northern Michigan. We serve primarily 5 watersheds, but we extend outside of those watersheds in some situations as well. So I'd like to turn it over to Allison. We do have some survey questions that will come up every once in a while. The way the webinar is structured is that you will have those questions. Allison will begin her presentation. I think there's a couple poll questions that come up as well. And then at the end, we have a little short survey. And so any questions that you have, if you can put that in the Q&A, we will answer those. We'll save that primarily for the end, unless it's related to a point of clarification during the presentation. So welcome everyone to our first icebreaker. Behind the scenes, I'd like to thank a couple people. Lauren Dye on the Watershed Council staff and additional staff worked very hard in putting this session together. And then we also have Jennifer McKay, our policy director, who is on the back end handling some of the technical aspects of this year's program. So again, I'll just run through real quickly. The housekeeping, you will be muted. Those who are guests will be muted during the presentation. If you want to ask a question, and check the Q&A box, and then know that this is being recorded, and then we'll post it on our Facebook page, and it will reside as well on our website as soon as possible, so that those who want to share it with others or were not able to attend can review it. Thank you, everyone, and I'll turn it over to Allison.
I will unmute there. Thank you so much, Katie and everyone. I'll pull up my slides here. All right, can you just give me a thumbs up here? Can we see my screens coming through?
Looks good.
Awesome, thank you. All right, well, welcome everybody. My name is Allison, and it was mentioned I work primarily in Wisconsin, all on road salt, water softener salt, all the various salts that make their way into our water. So today I'm going to give an overview of how that impacts our aquatic ecosystems. But first, I just want to recognize that Wisconsin Saltwise is a partnership. So we are comprised of nonprofits, municipalities, counties, stormwater groups across Wisconsin that see the value of our fresh water and the threat that salt poses to it. So our primary funding partner is the Fund for Lake Michigan, but we receive funding and resource support from a number of entities across the state. Just a little bit about me. I grew up in northwestern Wisconsin, not too far from the Chippewa River, and always loved going out on the water, swimming, fishing, boating. So I am assuming that a lot of you probably enjoy many of those activities as well. And like Wisconsin, Michigan is really blessed with abundant freshwater resources. I think we are kind of tasked with stewarding those resources. So I love water, but unfortunately, salt also loves water, or maybe we should say water loves salt. So we're going to talk a lot about salt today. I'm going to talk sometimes about sodium and chloride. So I just wanted to show a little visual here because sodium chloride, salt, is made up of those two ions. And when they go into water, when we put them in like a glass of water, or they end up, melting snow, the water molecules kind of give those sodium and chloride ions a giant hug. And it's a bear hug, one that they never want to let go of. So once we have salt in water, we consider salt a permanent pollutant because it's nearly impossible to pull salt out of water, right? And that's when we can't do that at our wastewater treatment plants. We can't, do that in our lakes and streams. And so that's why it's so important to keep salt out of water to begin with. So that sodium chloride, the same sodium chloride that we see in our salt shakers. So we all, interact with salt in various ways. So I'm going to have the team pull up one of our poll questions here. I would like you as members of the audience today to kind of share, what do you know about salt? What would you say that this little kid, like a kindergartner, what are their thoughts about salt? What do cooks and chefs know about salt? What perspectives might our doctor have about salt, or just some random person on the street? So I'm sure that you all have a lot of information. I'd like to just kind of see where people are at coming to this presentation today. So can you pull up the first poll question?
Unfortunately, it's not working. I apologize.
Okay. That's all right. So maybe in the chat, can people put in, you can put good, bad, or just random facts, things that you know about salt. I would love to see kind of what background knowledge people have today. So just in the chat, take a minute.
The chat feature is disabled.
Oh, okay. All right. That's all right. Okay, so we're just going to go forward. So I think that probably a lot of people recognize that salt is good. It tastes good, right? There's a reason why we love putting salt on a lot of food. We know that maybe we need some salt in our diet. It's not just, completely a toxin, but the bad kind of part is, kind of all things in moderation. If we have too much salt in our diet, it does do harm, right? And I'm not going to go into random facts. So you guys might know, I'll share one, that Michigan was actually the first state to put salt down on roads because you guys have a lot of salt buried underneath your state. And I don't know kind of how many hundreds of thousands of tons have been mined from around in the Detroit area, but maybe some of you do. Maybe there'll be a way to share that later. But we'll jump ahead here and continue on. You may or may not know that the cost of salt is going up, and this is actually pretty good for those of us who care about water, because when salt was pretty cheap, it would be used without much thought to the amount that was going down on our roads. And we've just seen the amount of salt that's been applied on highways across the country to just go up and up and up. And the fact that, the cost of salt, road salt, while still, fairly inexpensive, has almost tripled in the last 20 years, really changed the mindset of our state DOTs and led them to adopt a number of best practices that I'll go through later. We also might have some familiarity with the damage that salt does. So nationwide, we do over $2 billion of damage a year to vegetation as salt salinizes soils. And also when salt sprays up on vegetation, it can damage and kill trees, roadside vegetation. We see a lot of premature aging of our infrastructure due to salting and oversalting on bridges and roads. Number of us, probably familiar with the damage that salt can do to personal vehicles. So for every dollar that we spend on salt that's applied, we're doing at least $10 of damage to our infrastructure. So salt looks a lot less cheap at this point.
To people, while the chat box has been disabled, you can type your questions under the Q&A below, if you look in the navigational bar at the bottom of your screen, you can type questions as we go along there, and then we will answer those at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Great. So the Q&A is a way for us to communicate. So I'm going to dive though into salt's impacts in our freshwater systems. And to do that, I would like you to think about pickles. Love eating pickles myself. The pickle effect. So when we put a cucumber into salty water, we've got in my little diagram here on the bottom left, little kind of like Mickey Mouse kind of characters, little heads kind of floating around there. Those are supposed to be our water molecules, 2 H's and an O, H2O, water. And then we've got salt water on the right side. So those little hexagons are standing in for salt. So if something's pretty watery and we've got a permeable, semi-permeable membrane, that salt kind of draws the water through that membrane to kind of dilute the salt. And that's what we see happening right with our cucumber that we put into a salt brine solution. The water is going to drawn out of the cucumber, it turns into a pickle. So big idea here is that when we have those salty solutions, they cause the cells to lose water and find a new balance with their surroundings. So just diving into this just a little bit more again here, we have our little happy cell, right? It's got some salt inside, sodium chloride inside the cell, there's some outside, there's water moving in and out. But when we add salt, there's more salt now around the cell than there is inside. What's going to happen? Well, we think about our pickle effect, right? Water is going to be drawn out of that cell. Our cell looks a little less happy right now. He's turned into a pickle, right? So that can be great, right? Pickles, like I said, can be delicious. Pickled food, sauerkraut, we have pickled lemons up there. Salt tastes great. And also, why do we pickle things to begin with? We pickle them so that we can eat them later, right? They're preserved. If you think, a little bit more about this, why are they preserved? Why do they last longer? Well, we're preventing the bacteria from growing and eating those foods before we get a chance to eat them, right? So salt is toxic. At high levels, salt is toxic to those tiny little microbes, right? And prevents them from growing. It's turned them into pickles and they can't reproduce. So that's good when we want to save the food, when we want to stop the growth of other organisms, but it's not so good when it's damaging organisms that we want to have living in the water. So again, cells exposed to high levels of salt, they're going to lose water, they shrink. And then the movement of things inside the cell stops. The cell tries to combat that by taking some salt, bringing it into the cell. And when that happens, then we can see those little red dots inside the cell. It's good, it's got some more volume, it can kind of, keep going, but the salt inside there, that chloride is a toxin and it slows down the workings of the cell and doesn't really fully recover. So when that's happening to tiny little things like zooplankton in our freshwater ecosystems, it's stressing out their bodies. Those zooplankton populations go down, and that means there's less food going up the food chain. If we don't have as many zooplankton around, it means we don't have many grazers eating the algae. And we see some algae populations increasing. Our water gets greener and murkier. Again, there are other contributors to that too, right? Phosphorus, nutrients, moving off of farm fields, etc. But salt exacerbates this. So fewer, kind of game fish, more algae is a way to really simplify this. If you want more information, this research is coming out of the University of Toledo right now. Researcher Bill Hintz, who spoke at Salt Awareness Week a couple of years ago. This is actually his brother-in-law, the sports fisherman. So I want us to now kind of step up from thinking about like tiny little organisms, cells in water to bigger systems. So think about you and I, right? And blood moving through our bodies. So it's our red in the center was a blood vessel. And then this is my little basic depiction of our cells. When we eat a lot of salt, maybe you had some pretzels or potato chips, something for your lunch, an early lunch here, maybe you're eating some salt right now. In about half an hour or so, the salt concentration in your blood is going to go up. There's going to be more salt moving through your blood vessels. Now think again about the pickle. If we have cells with a lot of water, and now we've got a lot more salt kind of in their surroundings, what's going to happen? The water is drawn out of the cells into the blood. That salt draws that water in. Now, what's happened to the pressure inside our blood vessels? With all that extra water, our blood pressure rises. So our kidneys can work to kind of pull that salt out, but too much salt becomes a stressor on them. High blood pressure over time can reduce blood flow to our organs, cause damage to a lot of body systems. So again, some salt can be all right, but when we overload our bodies with salt over time, it's a stress. And then we see that in other organisms in water that have evolved to be in freshwater. When we bump that salt concentration up, we see reduced rates of growth and reproductions, higher susceptibility to parasites. Again, this is research from Bill Hintz, these are his photographs. So basically salt is a toxin, salt is a stressor, and smaller, like the juvenile trout here, they're the ones first impacted because their bodies don't have much ability to osmoregulate or to draw salts out. So what values of salt are we concerned about? This is a table put together by Michigan Eagle, and you can see that their values here are some of the lowest in the region. It's some of the most recent research that was done just in the last several years. And their toxicologists, their experts looking at this have said that we really want to keep our chloride concentration. So again, this is not the sodium part, we're talking specifically about chloride, down below 150. I'm just going to change our unit here. Instead of micrograms per liter, I'm going to say 150 milligrams per liter, or 150,000 micrograms per liter. And this is a chronic standard. So this is saying if organisms are in water that is this salty over time, it's going to be damaging to them. And there's also a secondary standard, or in, I guess this case, it's listed first, an acute standard saying that if organisms are in water that is this salty for even a short period of time, it's going to have negative consequences for their health. So again, Michigan has recommended lower values, and some of the newest research is out of Ohio is kind of shedding some light on the fact that maybe even those values need to be reduced further to be protective of the most sensitive species. So what are you seeing in the state? Again, this is data that's been shared with me from your biologists at the state, at the Eagle. And we can see here kind of a heat map on the left showing highest concentrations, unsurprisingly, in the most urbanized part of the state. The most pavement means the most salt, going down. And we see chloride concentrations up into the hundreds of milligrams per liter. And then over on the right, this is kind of breaking it down by specific water bodies. And we see a number of values above that chronic toxicity standard. Or excuse me, I think this is the chronic, yes, chronic value there. One thing I want to note here is sometimes when we're aggregating this data and getting averages, we kind of miss a big part of the story because salt doesn't go down throughout the year, right? We're putting a lot of salt down generally in the winter months. And then when we have melting events in the winter or later in the spring, all of that salt washes in, and we can sometimes have some really big loading events. So this is data from Wisconsin, where chloride grab samples were taken for a couple years, and they were able to catch some of those spikes where we see chloride concentrations up into the thousands of milligrams per liter. Again, Wisconsin levels currently are not as stringent as what has been recommended in Michigan, but you can see those values are going way above the acute toxicity limit, which in Wisconsin is set closer to 800 milligrams per liter. So if we go back down to that, 150, we were well above that most of the year. So what this actually indicates is, even though we have those loading events kind of during the winter, early spring, we aren't going back down to zero. And that's because salt's showing up in our groundwater and recharging streams, even in the summer months. But to go back to what monitoring is going on in Michigan, there is some targeted monitoring happening in streams where restoration efforts have occurred, and then we're not seeing the aquatic ecosystems kind of bounce back. So they're trying to understand, is salt a part of that story? Are high salt concentrations part of the reason why those little critters still aren't really happy in these physically, restored streams? So monthly chloride sampling is happening. That can be, kind of expensive and hard to get out there and get those grab samples. So something else that's being used is conductivity monitoring. Conductivity is a way to measure all of the different ions or the positively and negatively charged components of the water. So again, sodium and chloride are a couple ions. And so if we can take a look at conductivity and put devices in that can continuously tell us the story about conductivity, and then work to relate conductivity back to chloride, we can gain a lot more information about what's happening in our streams. So it takes some work to kind of create those conductivity chloride curves or figure out the relationship between conductivity and chloride in various streams, but that work is happening in Michigan right now. And these are some of the points where it's happening, where there are these little sensors are called mayfly sensors, and you can learn more about that. I think Trout Unlimited in Michigan has worked on this, as well as the state. And I can answer more questions about that. I think we actually might have someone who's a part of that work on the call too, who could answer those at the end. So these are a couple graphs showing conductivity in the winter months. Again, we see those, spikes up, conductivity going up probably, during a snow melt event that's moving a lot of salty water into streams. And then in the summer months, we actually see kind of like the inverse of that, right? And what this indicates is that, while conductivity is fairly stable, if we have a rain event in the summer that is diluting the ions or including the amount of salt in the water. So lots of information there. I'm going to move on now, though, to some of the broader ecosystem impacts of salt pollution. So one of those is its impact to lake turnover. So we know that in a lot of our freshwater lakes, we have stratification kind of different temperatures throughout the lake, and lakes will naturally turn over, kind of flip a couple times in the year, and then that cycles nutrients and oxygen throughout the water column. But as we have salt build up in our lakes, salt water is more dense than fresh water, so we kind of form a cold, salty layer at the bottom of the lake that is really resistant to that flipping. So sometimes it slows down natural lake turnover, and it can even completely stop it. It's called cultural meromixis. If you want to get really nerdy, you can pull that one out. But we have some lakes in upstate New York as well as Minnesota where this has happened. We also see the formation of chemical cocktails. So as sodium and chloride concentrations build up in our soils, it causes the release of other ions into our groundwater. So this is where, coming out of the University of Maryland, Sujay Kashal is actually going to be a speaker in a couple of weeks during Wisconsin's Salt Awareness Week, would highly, highly recommend joining in on that. But I'll give you a quick rundown on the idea here. So I get to nerd out a little bit with some more chemistry and some soil science. So our clay particles in the soil, present even when we think we have like fairly sandy soils, there's still some clay in there. They do a really great job of holding on to positively charged ions because they have little negative charges. So it's kind of like, think about like magnets, right? Clay particles are magnets for those positively charged ions. When we're sending salty storm water, salty runoff through the soil, those clay particles are exposed to sodium and they just grab hold, right? The sodium has that positive charge, clay has a negative charge, gives it that big bear hug, and it doesn't want to let go. Chloride is negative, so those run through, and so we see higher concentrations of chloride, but we also see the release of other positively charged ions because sodium's kind of taken their place. So we're releasing, might be like the potassium, manganese, could be lead, iron, other positively charged ions, and those concentrations start going up in our water. So the fact that Flint, the city of Flint was drawing saltier water from the Flint River, that exacerbated the lead crisis there. So I've talked about a lot of things that are not so pleasing, maybe don't seem so hopeful, but I'm going to switch now and talk a bit about what is being done and what we can do. So the first thing is education. So thank you all for joining the webinar today. There's a lot of work to educate the general public on this issue, to educate operators, municipal staff, state and county highway workers, private contractors, anybody and everybody who puts salt down, who might be going out on roads, needs to understand the impacts of that salt and the fact that, excuse me, more salt isn't always better. So in Wisconsin, we have a number of in-person, but also virtual classes. So obviously probably a little easier for you, people in your community, to join some of those virtual classes, including webinars that go out every month that really dig into best practices. So there's a ton of resources on our website. You can check that out. These are some of the Wednesday webinars. So a number of those are success stories from different municipalities that have reduced salt use by 50%, sometimes even more than that. We also host a number of open house events. So this would be something I would highly recommend to help facilitate in Michigan, where we bring municipalities together. We bring private contractors and school districts and anybody who's doing winter maintenance into a space where they can share those best practices, what's working, what's not in terms of equipment and rates and materials, et cetera. So just really encouraging the sharing of best practices. And then whenever we have those events, we really work to spread awareness to the general public during those. So getting on the media as much as possible. So what are those best practices? Here's a wheel showing you a bunch of them. I think I'm going to dig just briefly into these to kind of give you an overview. So one, covering salt. This salt pile is not doing anybody any good. We're losing a lot of salt. It's running off into our streams. And it's, degrading the salt. You can't really use it when it's all clumpy like that. The next one is calibrating. So huge over application of salt here. Again, not doing anybody any good. You can actually trip, on all of this extra salt that's left over. It's damaging the concrete and damaging our water. So what's the problem? Oftentimes it's equipment that isn't really designed to put down the right amount of salt, or people just don't have it on the right setting, lack of, kind of education and understanding of what rates are needed. So calibration really is huge. This is a story from the city of Cudahy, just south of Milwaukee. Before they calibrated a truck that was supposed to be putting down 300 pounds per lane mile was actually putting down closer to 900 pounds per lane mile. So just calibrating equipment alone reduced their salt use by 50% the first year. They were able to reinvest those dollars and make additional savings the second year to the tune of tens, almost $100,000. So we have resources to support truck calibration, drop spreader calibration, etc. When you're just like around your house or at a building, that might involve being really clear on a bucket. If you're going to put salt out, let people know how much, or how many scoops they should be using. So we're not just over applying salt in those entryways, because then we're just tracking it in. And then varying those rates, as I mentioned, this is especially important for contractors, people who are applying road salt down on municipal streets and highways, that we're just using it as needed based on current pavement temperatures and weather trends. Pre-wetting material really goes a long way. When salt is added to water, we get that salt brine. That way the salt is activated, and once it goes down, it can start the melting process immediately. So salt can be added before the storm as like a pre-treatment on the roads. It works like oiling your skillet before you cook. So you can prevent that bond from forming between the snow and the pavement. The snow comes up much more easily, less salt is needed on the back end. Salt brine can also be added to rock salt when the rock salt is applied, and that way it helps the rock salt stick on the road. Again, it's activated, and we really see the reduction in application rates. And this is just showing that it doesn't have to be super costly to make some of these changes and use brine. So on the right, it's a photo of a homemade brine maker from UW Eau Claire. On the left, one at UW La Crosse. So these are both made in-house with minimal investment in this equipment. So I think it was maybe $200 to $300, and these universities are making their own brine and seeing the benefits of that. The next is on the little wheel, it says use live edge plows, sectional plows that can be more responsive to differences or unevenness in the pavement. But I would really just say the emphasis here is just better mechanical removal. So if we can move more snow, then we don't need as much chemical afterwards. So I like this photo here on the left of a John Deere little kind of like gator with those rotary brush tools. If you're at home, maybe you shovel, and then instead of putting salt down on the remaining snow, you sweep it off your steps or the sidewalk, or work to get a better shovel that can, get a better scrape. And then evaluating those expectations for levels of service. So, we've really moved in the last several decades to this idea that pavement has to be completely bare. We have to keep every single entrance open. I think kind of questioning some of those norms. We do want areas to be accessible, but at UW campus, they've got a lot of stairwells and sometimes very wide ones. So just closing a few of those down, again, letting people know why that's happening, can really save people time, money, reduce liability, and save us salt. So just to emphasize, extra salt, when we see extra salt left over, this is a photo I took several days after the last snow event. There had been a lot of rain in between. This extra salt is not keeping anybody safe. We do see, though, the damage that's done here, this pitting of our concrete. It's damaging that infrastructure. It's doing damage to our freshwater. So we really need to continue to educate people on that so that they can see those harms. We also really work to tell the success stories. So again, this little snip from our Twitter post, the Ho-Chunk Casino in the Madison area reduced their salt use by 70% by incorporating brine, working on better mechanical removal. And of course, that was all predicated on the education of their staff. So other ways that you can get involved locally would be to help monitor what is happening with chloride concentrations in your local streams and water bodies. So the Isaac Walton League actually provides free test kits for this. So you can go online, type in your address, and they will send you some test strips and also a little reader. And then you can put that information, share that back with them, and they'll create a map or add it to their national map. I would also, as I think I mentioned at least once, that Sujay is speaking in just a couple weeks. We have a full lineup during Salt Awareness Week on a variety of topics, sharing the science, monitoring what we're seeing, impacts to human health. And then I'll be talking a little bit more focused on kind of ways that citizens can get involved. The Spot Over Salting campaign just started this year in the Madison area. So citizens are encouraged to take a picture if they do see excess salt and then upload that, let us know where they came across that. And then we work to communicate with property managers and contractors. And then there's also a program right now in New Hampshire where any contractors who get certified in best practices will actually have some liability protection. So we do know that the reason that a lot of people err on the side of over application is that fear of liability. So working to remove that so that if a contractor goes out and they follow best practices, they document what they do, yes, there might be a slip and fall, but they've done their due diligence. So they'd be protected. So we have a draft bill right now to create a similar program in Wisconsin. So hoping, we are crossing my fingers, we're going to get that introduced in the next few weeks or maybe a month or so here. Finally, kind of want to mention that municipalities can also take action. So even if we aren't able to be successful at the state level, there is a new rule in the city of Madison that if people have salt left over, businesses have salt left over on public sidewalks, that they need to clear that up. They need to sweep up that extra salt so it doesn't end up in our water. So just in summary, kind of what can be done. We do really want to train those winter maintenance professionals. Like I mentioned, a lot of resources available on our website, but the public needs to understand kind of why changes might be happening. So Salt Awareness Week, other kind of events that you might want to do. I'm going to be running a couple pop-up spot over salting events, be something that could maybe be fun for you and other members of local watershed groups to just go out after there's a storm and then a salting event, spot some of that oversalting and have some conversations with businesses. And then, yeah, very happy to help collaborate on getting a Saltwise message out there, supporting any legislation, etc. So with that, I think we got some time for questions. If people have any, this is my email if you want to follow up, but happy to take questions now.
First, I just want to really thank you, Allison. There's a lot of great information there that I think we can all use both at home and in our professional lives as well. I'm Katie Wolf, the Executive Director of the Watershed Council, and we do have several questions. So I'd like to, before we get into the questions, I'd appreciate it. It looks like our Q&A function is working. We weren't able to conduct the poll. So if you could, we'd love to know how many people are watching with you. If you're watching by yourself or with another person, how you found out about today's webinar, if there are other topics that you would like for us to focus on, and where you're from, what are you, who are you affiliated with? So if you could share that information before you sign out, we'd really appreciate that. And we do have a question, to get things started. How much salt does Michigan use on an annual basis? Does anybody know that? You go to the Q&A session and post that, unless you work for Eagle and you manage that program. We'll share that answer after we go through. We do have quite a few questions, so we'll try to get through these, but if we understand if some people need to check out. So starting out, Allison, what's the source of data points that are interpolated in the Michigan heat map?
So again, I'm not the expert on this. I think one of the staff from Eagle might be on the call right now, so maybe he wants to type in a little bit more information, but just am aware that there are a number of monitoring sites around the state. So it's your state agency that's kind of gathering that data annually. But yeah, I'll ask Kevin if he's on to maybe type that into the Q&A.
Thank you. And then the next question, we have seen high chloride levels in winter spring melt, but also during drought summer months in our tributary sampling in Western New York State. We surmised the groundwater plays a bigger role in recharging streams in summer and may be contaminated. Have you seen any groundwater studies on chloride and road salt specifically?
Yeah, so I would encourage you, it looks like Joanna, to check out the Salt Awareness Week presentation by Charlie Paradise out of UW Milwaukee, because that's actually what he's been studying the last several years, looking both at surface water chloride concentrations. So he's looking at chloride, not the sodium component, but looking at all that data that was collected by sewer pack, which I showed kind of those spikes in that chloride grab sample graph, and then also looking at groundwater chloride concentrations. I'm also working with Kevin Masaryk, who's the groundwater specialist out of UW Extension. And he actually just put together a map for me of sodium concentrations in municipal drinking water wells across the state. So again, that kind of animation that I showed of sodium and chloride coming into our soils, and then chloride, moving readily through the soil, has led researchers in the past to focus much more on the chloride component of salt in our groundwater, and people haven't done a lot of research looking at sodium. At least that's what I've seen. I haven't seen much data on sodium, but Kevin was able to pull all the data that was available from municipal reporting, and we see elevated sodium concentrations across the state. In some cases, 5 times over the value that's recommended for people who are supposed to be on low sodium diets. So happy to follow up with you more after today. I can share the map that we just got put together, and then we're working on creating a Shiny app, or I should say Kevin's team is, to show what those trends have been, where we have enough information to put those historical trends together, and also just more attention to what's happening now. So the state of Wisconsin, our DNR, Department of Natural Resources, is now recommending that municipalities test for sodium concentrations annually. So that was a recommendation that just came out in their chloride working group kind of executive report at the end of 2022.
Great. And so just I did note that it appears that the poll question was working, and we had 11 people answer. And so the question was, how much road salt does Michigan use on an annual basis? And the answer is 450,000 tons of salt a year. And that is based on a recent study from Michigan State University and the University of Wisconsin. So 450,000 tons of salt a year used in Michigan. So our next, go ahead.
Two people were very close with answering 500,000 tons.
Great. Thank you. And so the next question is, what's the best method for measuring or monitoring the salt in your lake?
So in lakes, if it freezes over, that might be kind of hard to do year round. In times when you're able to go out there and get a grab sample, I think as a citizen, I would recommend just participating in the Isaac Walton League Salt Watch, because they'll send you little test strips for free. It would be great if we could, have more comprehensive testing going on and be able to get grab samples kind of at different depths to really see if we have, that stratification and, what we see at the surface isn't necessarily giving us a ton of information about what's happening at those lower levels, but that's what I'd recommend for now.
Okay, our next question. Allison, thanks so much for the info. The Watershed Center Grand Traverse Bay is piloting a volunteer lead road salt monitoring project, volunteer-led road salt monitoring project in the area. We're using specific conductance meters with coincident chloride grab samples so that we can understand the specific relationship between total chloride and SC in our waters. Can you or anyone help us answer some questions about how to establish the regression, number of samples, what size geographic area applies to, et cetera? You're getting into some technicalities.
Yeah.
Here,
so yeah, thanks Heather for your question. Yeah, that question of like specific conductance to the chloride grab samples is something that is coming up right now in an EPA working group that I'm a part of, trying to understand that in different regions and how researchers are doing that work. So you're really at the cutting edge here. I would actually probably punt that to, again, to the staff at Eagle, because I think they'd be able to help you with that. And it's possible that they've already done that work for your area. So if you want to shoot me an email at wisaltwise@gmail.com, I'll be able to put you in touch with the people that will be able to help facilitate that.
Thank you. Does the City of Madison salting rule include fines or penalties for non-compliance?
Yes, it does. So the idea is that first it's focused on education, because again, most of the time people are putting salt down. Maybe it's that fear of liability, but behind it all, it's we want to keep people safe. And so I don't know if there have been any fines assessed yet, but there is a fine of up to $50 that can be assessed if, maybe if there's a repeat offender.
It looks like we have two questions regarding heated sidewalks. So can you talk about heated sidewalks / pathways as a best management practice for reducing salt use? And what are the trade-offs between salt and heated sidewalks?
Yeah, so I definitely think that the heated sidewalks make sense in areas where you have access, easy access to that. So I know in the Madison area, the Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District put in some new steps and for people that enter their building, and they were able to divert some wastewater so it runs through that concrete and will allow excess heat from the wastewater to facilitate melting. I don't think in areas, there are some areas, I think in Milwaukee, where they also are able to use heat to help melting off of sidewalks. But if, that's not in somewhere, I think then we run into like, are we going to have, a lot more kind of carbon, right? Like greenhouse gas released to try to generate heat to heat the sidewalks. So I think that's a little bit more of like a case by case basis, trying to understand, locally what resources are available.
So the next question is, does Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council work with the local road commissions on road salt application? And so I know that we invited all the road commissions to participate in this discussion, and that our staff do work with road commissions, but it may be something that we formalize after, participating in this presentation and looking at other ways that we can be more engaged on that. I don't know if Jennifer McKay, if you want to add to that.
We actually have worked with some of our local road commissions on salt application and reducing it. I know Emmett County has tried to incorporate some of the beet juice to try and minimize the use of salt. So we've worked with them over the years, but I think definitely we can probably do more engagement on this issue.
Thank you. So another question. I live in a condo with snow removal service. If I sweep up excess salt, what do I do with it?
It's a good question, Mary. I kind of have the same problem myself. So Yeah, a few things. One, I do encourage if you sweep up extra salt to measure it, and then share that information with the condo association or the contractor, maybe kind of both, so that people can understand, how much extra salt has been applied if that's all present after the snow's gone. I would love it if you want to share that with me, and I can help share that this, this is happening. And then we can also calculate, how many gallons of water would have been contaminated if that salt ended up in our waters. I've actually been able to get some media outlets to pick up on that, those stories of people going out and sweeping salt, and it's a great way to raise general awareness. So all of those ripple effects kind of potentially beyond the direct impact that your work is having. But then what do you do with that salt? I have a growing collection in my garage because I just do this frequently. I haven't personally used salt now in a couple of years. So I do know there are some municipalities that will take salt back from residents, but I don't know that that would necessarily be happening right now in your community. Maybe that's something that the Tip of the Mitt group would, be able to help facilitate. But yeah, I would maybe give it away to a neighbor that, does use salt. Yeah.
So the next question is whether the slideshow is available. And so after this program, we will be posting the video of the presentation as well as the slides. And you will be able to receive that through notice on our Facebook as well as the website where the event is located. So yes, we will have that information. And thank you, Allison, for graciously sharing that information.
Yeah, I will also add that we have a variety of resources on our website for teachers and students. So we have a lesson plan geared more towards high school students, as well as one geared more towards elementary school students, and then various little just 2-minute videos about some of the research that's happening that's geared towards classroom teachers.
Excellent. And so we will also have additional links that Allison has recommended posted on our website too. So you'll be able to follow up and get more information there as well. Okay, and so Kevin Goodwin from Eagle noted that the data points that someone asked about earlier was from the annual monitoring locations collected by the Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy Department's surface water program. So we got an answer there. Thank you, Kevin. And then the next question is a little more info, please, on TU's mayfly monitoring.
Yeah, so I learned about this from a magazine article about Toronto Limited's work, kind of putting these sensors out into Michigan streams. I probably would, if you want to email me, I would direct you to the person who runs that program, and then also I could send you the article from that. But I don't remember a lot of specifics on how many of them are out there, but just the idea is that they are continuously monitoring conductivity, and that can kind of serve as a proxy for chloride. So it's a relatively inexpensive way to get a big picture view of what's happening in our streams.
So the next question, thank you. Are salts other than sodium chloride used for snow and ice?
Yes. So quick answer is yes. Just a little bit of a dive into some alternative de-icers. So the chloride family, we typically see sodium chloride, that's the cheapest. It's fairly effective at melting ice down to 15 degrees, maybe 20 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. So, we want melting to happen when we get below 32, then down to about 15, we can be using sodium chloride. When we get below 15, straight salt is not very effective. And so that's when we want to switch. If you're a homeowner, maybe you switch and you just put some sand down for traction. Our municipalities and highway departments are then usually going to be incorporating some other chlorides. So magnesium chloride and calcium chloride both have lower effective melting points. They're also a bit more expensive. So, and there are other issues too, which I'm not going to get into. There's a lot of science, but there are multiple reasons why you wouldn't use those at higher temperatures. And then also they are still chloride, so they still have environmental impacts. Earlier, beet juice was mentioned. I don't hear about many people using straight beet juice. There's a lot of, there are different issues with that and can kind of clog up equipment, but using the sugars from beet juice in a proprietary product like beet heat or different sugars from molasses, sugars, while they don't melt ice, they can prevent the refreeze. If you think about like chomping into an ice cube from your freezer, a little kind of solid, not good for your teeth, but if you chomp into a popsicle, it's a different situation, right? So those sugars prevent the water molecules from making a solid bond. So sugars also work as corrosion inhibitors, and they can also help the salt stick to the road. So there are various additives that are used in addition to the chlorides. And then there are non-chloride de-icers that again have a higher price point, but we don't have that chloride persistent in our environment. There are other concerns then though about, if it's an organic product like, sugars or potassium formate, calcium magnesium acetate, those organic ions are broken down, which seems good, right? But if they're broken down readily by microbes in the water, that can draw oxygen levels down in the waterways. So then we have biological oxygen demand concerns.
Thank you. So we just have a few more questions and I think we might be able to get through them within the time frame. These are great questions and answers. Thanks for the wonderful analogies, Allison, and being able to picture your recommendations or suggestions. How does water softener salt factor into this issue?
Yeah, so water softener salt is definitely a contributor because, as I mentioned, the wastewater treatment plants cannot pull that salt out of the water. The amount that, or the relative kind of impact of water softeners to road salt varies state to state. So I don't know that Michigan has done kind of like a full chloride budget. And I'm not an expert on water softener use in Michigan. I know a lot more about what's going on in Wisconsin, but I would definitely make a few recommendations. There's, again, more information on our website if you want to reach out. You want to make sure that you're only using a softener if you need one for water hardness. If the problem is iron, want to move to an iron filter that doesn't use salt, or an iron curtain, sometimes they're called. Also making sure if you do have a salt-based softener that it's optimized based on your local water hardness and your household's water use. And you definitely do not want one of those old timer-based systems that just regenerates every like 2 or 3 days, regardless of how much water you've used. That would be equivalent to going to the gas station every 3 days, dumping at your gas tank and just refilling it, regardless of how much gas you have in there. So extremely wasteful.
Thank you. Okay, so this next question, hopefully I will interpret it correctly. I think they're wanting more information on those regular sessions that you were talking about, where they could pick those up on, as well as the testing kits from the Isaac Walton League that you mentioned. So I don't know if that's something you want to verbally do, and then we can type the answer for you.
Yeah, so if people are interested in checking out our Salt Awareness Week presentations, and then or any of the webinars, I would just direct you to our website, so wisaltwise.com. And there are links right on the homepage to those things. If you have any issues, again, just email me, wisaltwise@gmail.com. But yeah, the Salt Awareness Week webinars should be excellent in just a couple weeks.
And then, so interesting question, of those 450,000 tons of salt, do we have estimates on how much of that salt drains directly to our rivers and lakes, at least in northern Michigan? That would require, I don't know if Kevin is still online, but that may be a follow-up.
Yeah, question. I mean, the basic answer there is all of it. All of it is making its way into our water. So it's either, moving directly into water from storm drains, right? If it doesn't drain directly into our waterways, it's, moving into our soils. But, that chloride not caught by the soil, all that chloride, it's making its way into our groundwater, which is recharging our surface water. And the sodium, might be building up in the soils for a while. That will eventually move into our water as well. But chloride is not slowed down at all, even by rain gardens. Those do a great job of filtering out sediment, but they do nothing for salt.
And we're down to the last few questions. So thank you, Allison, for your excellent answers and holding in there for us. So how much education do you do on the impacts from increased chloride levels as a result of water softeners?
Yeah, so I know I spoke about water softeners and some of the best practices. Again, you can check out our website for more. I'm trying to line up some speakers talking about some of the alternatives for a future Wednesday webinar, but we do have programming coming out, which I think is going to go live this weekend, where we've collaborated with local wastewater treatment plants that are discharging high rates of salt, because all that salt from softeners comes to them and then just gets released. They can't pull it out. And also with local plumbers union. So we've got some information coming out kind of for homeowners about that. Again, keep an eye on our social media sites or email me. I can send the links to that once those are live. And then check out our website. I can get you more resources.
I think we'll be working with you a lot more, Allison. So last question. In my opinion, educating the public is very important. Public demand, this is more of a comment, public demand for bare roads during the winter months increases every year.
Yeah.
And there was
I would just add to that this is true. And in part, it's because people don't understand that there are costs to that salt use. We feel like convenience is number one. We should be able to run to Target in the middle of the snowstorm. But I am seeing like some, municipalities who are saying, no, like there is a line here. And in the city of Madison, they've kind of pulled back on salt applications. One of the biggest things is, yes, they'll salt arterials, main roads through the community, but they're not salting every single residential street. So they will put some sand down, but the idea is if you're on a residential street, you can drive slowly for a few blocks until you get onto, an arterial that will be bare, but we're not going to move everything to bare pavement.
Great. Thank you so much, Allison. I really appreciate your time today and expertise. I think this was an excellent seminar. And so I hope to follow back up with you and make sure that we post some of those answers, and we have things on our website that drive the links to yours as well. So people who are more interested in this topic can follow up. Before I wrap up, is there anything you'd like to add at the end?
Like I said, just thank you everybody for coming. And I hope that this is kind of a first step for you, and you can continue to be an advocate for our fresh water and work to keep salt out of it by just sharing the word.
Thank you. We hope to be able to borrow some of your efforts in Wisconsin to make sure that we're doing the same in Michigan. So I just want to remind everyone that we have several more icebreaker series coming up. The next one will be January 25th. Microplastics in our fresh waters. We will have Kennedy Bucci, who is with the University of Toronto, talking about microplastics and the impact, particularly with the Great Lakes. So we hope you'll come back and join us at that time. And if you have additional questions, you can always go to our website or send an email to info@watershedcouncil.org. Our website is also watershedcouncil.org. So we'd love to hear from you. And don't forget, if you had a chance, it may be too late now, to add some of those answers regarding where you're coming from, who you're watching with, and how you learned about today's program. Have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you on January 25th. Thank you.